Welcome back to The Decision 2024 from Valuetainment. This is where we let the candidates do the talking, but we dive into the numbers and the polls to bring you the up-to-date changes as we see them, and we run them through our very own algorithm, VT Analytics. I'm Tom Ellsworth, the Biz Doc.
I'm Amy Dangerfield, and words talk but numbers scream. But first, let's go ahead and dive into the headlines from this last week.
Speaking of words screaming.
Yes, it's been a very dramatic week. RFK has officially endorsed Trump and taken his name off the ballot. However, North Carolina seems unwilling to oblige, so he's actually suing them now to remove his name from the ballot. From there has been some division amongst the Republican Party over Trump's policies pertaining to not only abortion, but also IVF. Obviously, a lot of Catholic and Christian groups are protesting to this stance. And then finally, Nancy Pelosi just said the quiet part out loud, Tom, on her most recent interview with Bill Maher, saying she wanted to move immigrants from undocumented to documented status. I wonder why that could be.
And that is a key headline because so many states, specifically Florida and Arizona, a swing state, battleground state, Arizona, care deeply about immigration. So what is left off here? No dramatic headlines regarding Kamala Harris. Oh, sure, there was some discussion about will they debate, what are the rules of the debate, what will they be putting forward, but there weren't any flubs or issue as she continues to go on a PR tour, although she did sit down with CNN, and it was a little bit of a nothing burger with some softballs from CNN. Didn't appear to give her a bounce out of that. As a matter of fact, when she did it with Tim Walz, many people on moderates that were polled thought, why doesn't she do it herself? Did she need him there? So maybe with moderates, there is a little bit of a skew that said, hey, I was glad to see her, and also a little bit of a skew that said, can't you speak for yourself? So we go into the National Daily. Now, we've been following Rasmussen because Rasmussen has been following the races for so many years, and we like how they crosstab, and we like, more importantly, how they tend to correlate with the actual finished result. As we go take a look in here, Amy, what are we seeing?
We've seen that Trump has been able to maintain a consistent lead throughout the last several days. Specifically, up until August 29th, he is now taking a 4-point lead, indicating that Kamala's bounce is at this point completely flatlined and even heading towards a downtrend, Tom.
And we're waiting for the debate, and that will be her opportunity to pop up. Although debates don't usually determine the election, they determine momentum if there's a key point made, as Ronald Reagan did, and as Bill Clinton did, even as Mitt Romney did in the first debate with Obama, but things righted themselves as far as Obama was concerned in the second debate. The debates come and go and have to be part of a bigger momentum play. Nonetheless, it does appear that there is separation that's happening here back in the direction of Trump versus Biden, although not as wide as it was at that time. Now, there's another element in this chart, which is the RFK column.
We can see that earlier in the race, Kamala was holding steady around 43 to 45% of the votes, whereas Donald Trump is holding steady anywhere between about 46 to 49. So it does beg the question, how are these RFK votes being redistributed, Tom?
I call this the RFK separation. Now, it's not going to be 5 to 7 points as far as our research shows the way it was under Biden, but it is holding a definitive edge for Trump. There are other national pollsters that are putting things out that we have been looking at crosstabs and looking at depth of the polls, whether it's a +6, +2 Democrat poll, +2, +1 Republican poll. And you look inside those figures, and this is what we are seeing. Aggregate polls are going, we believe, too far back into August to create this average that points to a Kamala lead nationally. We don't think it's there. We think Trump is 1.5 to 2 points on a national basis. Now, we got our hands on some polling data that was also published in the Wall Street Journal talking about how the playing field has changed among voting groups. Those voting groups, when you aggregate it all together, and it's we the people in the United States, gives you that national poll. Let's take a look here. So first thing we do is you go back and take a look at what was the support among voting groups. Here's Black voters, Latino voters, and the spread that was held by the candidates in 2020, Biden, Trump, and now 2024, Biden, Harris, because there's been enough time to do the research. This is exactly what we said was going to be coming out if you gave it a couple weeks' time so the pollsters could do their job and then we could do ours, assessing what we feel the bias or the strength of those respective polls were. Biden, where he was in 2020, Trump in 2020, and let's look at the change. Biden was over far more than 10 points. It was 16, 17 points down among Black voters this go around, 2024. Trump was up, about 9 points with Black voters. Now Trump is up 5 versus the election in 2020. Harris is down 10 versus the election in 2020. So you see, this is what part of the panic is about the African American or Black American vote. Latino voters, Biden was down almost 10. Harris is now down 6, and Trump was up 6 and now up 3. So Trump is up with both of these groups.
So let's take a look at age demographics. Between the ages of 18 to 29, we can see that Donald Trump has been slowly increasing his support amongst the younger demographics. Trump is up 8 percentage points compared to where he was in the year 2020. And when we take a look at that compared to Biden, Biden was slowly losing support among the younger demographics. We can see that he dropped here all the way down to about 15 percentage points there. Quite the drop. And Harris has picked it up a little bit. She's down 12 percentage points. However, compared to where Biden was sitting during the 2020 elections, the Dems are in a little bit of trouble with this age demographic. But it's not so much the case with their grandparents, it seems. We can see that Harris and Trump are tracking at a very similar level. There seems to be a tie of around 49% among senior voters. And by comparison, we can see that Harris is tracking at around about the same level, if not a little bit better than when Biden was during the 2020 election.
And Trump's actually down 2 points with those seniors. So that's interesting. Now let's dive even deeper. Let's go into the great gender debate, men and women.
Now, when we take a look at it by gender, we can see that the Biden-Harris administration has been seeing a steady decrease in their support from male voters. Wonder why that could be. We can currently see that she is down 4 percentage points from where Biden was during the 2020 elections. However, when we look at Trump, we can see that he has been steadily increasing his support from male voters. He's currently sitting up 2 percentage points from where he was in 2020. Interestingly, when we take a look at the support amongst women, we can see that Harris has actually lost a little bit of support compared to where Biden was in 2020. Now, I was personally a little surprised by this with all of the discourse about abortions, women's reproductive rights, and surprised to see that Trump has even gained a little bit of support compared to where he was sitting in the 2020 elections, Tom.
Now we go by race and education. And what's interesting here, you look at Caucasians, college educated. Harris is right where Biden was, whereas Trump is down a little bit. So the Caucasian, college educated people, Trump has lost a little support with Harris right where Biden was. But when you go to non-college, both have lost a little bit of support, with Trump being down a point and Harris down 2 points. When you put all of this together, the interesting point is, if Trump is gaining a little here, here, and here, while it's marginal, what's up at the polls on a national basis that are saying, oh, Kamala Harris is up by 5? We don't buy some of what we've been seeing. We dive in and we see a +5 or a +7 toward Democrat bias in the polls based on the group that they were able to assemble during the polling of registered voters or likely voters. And when we see all of that and we see headlines saying maybe she's got a 4-point lead, we say, okay, whose poll, what mainstream media outlet, who's talking, because they're forming narratives with it. We dove into this, and as you can see, we don't exactly see a path here where she could be 5% up on a national basis. That's why we feel Trump is probably 1.5 points up on a national basis when you normalize out the bias. And there's a lot of polls out there that have that bias. So that's it for the national view now. Amy, take us through the state. Where are we headed?
This time it's a little different because we're heading back to Arizona. And we wanted to head back to Arizona because a lot has been going on in this state. Obviously, after RFK's endorsement of Trump, this was the first state where they actually held an official rally together in Glendale. Fireworks, festivities, celebrations. But we were curious to see the way that this endorsement and that rally would impact the polls for Arizona. We can actually see the major point of difference right here, the breakout that is occurring where both Trump and Kamala seem to be on a little bit of an uptrend. Is this due to the redistribution of votes from RFK dropping out of the race? And we can see that it is a very close race. It is razor-thin margins. However, Trump is maintaining his lead in Arizona.
We're also seeing some textbook charting here. A candidate gets a bounce, impacting another candidate, but not nearly as much impact on the other candidate as the bounce they receive. They come together and then they settle, and then they both rise when you remove the third-party candidate. Again, this is a textbook example of exactly what we thought we'd be seeing, with now Trump starting to build the margin back. Is he going to build a 5 to 7 point margin as he had over Biden? Don't think so. Arizona should remain tight, but it's definitively on multi-weeks of poll now leaning toward Trump.
So now, a deep dive into some of the individual pollsters that make up that aggregate that we were just taking a look at. As we can see, there are 3 new polls that have been released, anywhere between the 28th to the 30th of last month. And we can see that Insider Advantage actually has Trump and Harris nearly dead even, with Trump polling at 49% and Harris polling at 48%. When we take a look at the next poll, which is sponsored by The Telegraph, we can see that Trump is actually up by 1%, and we can see that this is made up of 530 likely voters. Remember, we told you that when you're looking at these different polls, you want to take a look at the likely voter sample. And then finally, we have Emerson College, sponsored by The Hill, which tends to be a little bit more of a left-leaning publication. So it's surprising to see that Trump is actually up by 4 percentage points here. This is a poll that's comprised of 720 likely voters. And once again, we're seeing Trump up at 51% compared to Kamala Harris's 48%, indicating that the bounce that she was hoping for seems to be well and truly over. When we take a look at these in comparison to some of the older polls that we have available, we can see that the results are a little bit different. And it's very important to remember when you're looking at these various different polling aggregators, 538, for example, that you take a look at the most recent relevant polls, because everything prior to that was before RFK dropped out. And so when they aggregate all of these numbers together, it's really not painting a true picture of the current state of the race. And when we keep this in mind and we run the data through VT Analytics, we're pretty confident that Trump is up overall about 2.5 to 3 percentage points out of Arizona.
Still a battleground state, but we think we have the most rational point of view of what's really happening.
And so now it's time for our Valuetainment Call. This is the culmination of all of the data you just saw, plus our own aggregate through VT Analytics to bring you our call 9 weeks from the election. Tom, what are we seeing?
Well, here it is. We think there's a 55% chance Trump will be elected. We have the blue wall and toss-up category, although Pennsylvania was very, very close for us to put it in the Trump column, because we believe there's about a 2-point spread there. As we shared, we think it's 2.5 here in Arizona, maybe even closer to 3. And we see the trends there. We feel comfortable putting that in the Trump column this week, with Nevada remaining a toss-up. Put it all together, and we think there's a 55% probability that Donald Trump wins the election with an electoral map that looks largely like this. Although anything can happen, and it usually does.
Join us next week as we take a deep dive into a state that we haven't explored before, but it was by your popular demand. We read all of the comments, and we saw that many of you wanted to do a deep dive into the state of Virginia. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing next week. Plus, we'll also be journeying back to Pennsylvania to see the way the recent happenings have affected all of the polls. But until next time, thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Amy Dangerfield.
And I'm Tom Ellsworth, the Biz Doc. We'll let the candidates do the talking, we'll let the spin meisters do the spinning, but we'll dive into the numbers because words talk, but numbers scream.